So as you can see, we are starting out in Lightroom. This is very specific to my workflow. You can do this in Photoshop itself in the raw converter. There's one important setting that's really good to know that I always make sure is off. Let me open the developer. So basically what I do here in the raw conversion is I do the white balance. I make a little bit of a tweak where I think we should go. This is very specific to taste and style, but I always try to make it as neutral as possible because we're dealing with the skin tones. Any heavy color grading you do after the retouching. That's very important to know. And let's go down here. As you can see, I've turned my sharpening all the way down to 0. There's a significant difference when it comes to skin retouching and sharpening because as you can see, when we get all the way zoomed in close, when you up that sharpening, it's going to make all of these edges harsher, which is going to be a little bit more difficult for Photoshop to recognize and for details to start replicating themselves. You always want to turn this all the way down. Sharpening can always be done after the fact. And I'll show you a very important detail when it comes to the skin retouching process that you can actually bring back some of that sharpness in just the skin. So make sure that's off. And let's jump into Photoshop. So we are in Photoshop and let's go through the steps we are going to take first today. Now, first we are going to remove blemishes. And after that, we're going to do a technique called frequency separation. That basically means we're going to separate in another layer the texture from the color that's below. And then after that, we're going to use those two layers to blend color together below the skin texture. After that, we're going to tweak those layers and then do some finishing touches, and then your image is ready for color grading. The thing I want to do is take you through the tool that we're going to use today. And it's going to be 3 variations of that same tool. And that's over to the left-hand side of your screen, which is called either the Spot Healing Brush tool, the Remove tool, or the Healing Brush tool. Now, these 3 tools are basically variations of one another. Some people like to use the patch tool, but I mainly stick to these 3 up here. Now, I'll show you the differences real quick. So we've selected, first off, the Healing Brush tool. What this tool does is when you press Option on Mac or Alt on Windows, you can select an area that you want it to read from and paste on top of that blemish. So I'm going to select this area right here and I'm going to let go of Option. And then once I press down, you can see a cross show up where it's taking this texture from. And it's doing slight adjustments to make sure that it blends well. This is my absolute favorite tool because it allows you to control what you're doing. And now let's look at the other tools because as I said, they're variations of the other one. Now we have the Remove tool. This basically means that it's enhanced by AI. And all you have to do is just go over an area and it'll remove it. Now, sometimes this works perfectly. Sometimes it doesn't as much. I notice myself, but that's a personal thing, that it can leave behind some blurry strokes. And it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And I'm more of a person that likes to know what's happening with the image, so I usually avoid this one. Unless there's a spot, for example, that's really, like for example, a dust spot on the sensor, then it works amazingly. But for the skin, I prefer manual labor, believe it or not. And then the last one is the Spot Healing Brush tool, which in itself has some options as well. Proximity match, create texture, and content aware. Now, content aware is exactly what it says. It means that it's going to look at the content and cover it up. This is not AI enhanced. The tool is, because of that, quite a bit faster than the Remove tool, right? But again, this can leave some blurry streaks. What I do like is the proximity match because it looks around the area where to take information from. So now that you know these 3 tools, we're going to go to the next step of blemish removal, right? We're going to create a new layer because we don't want to touch that original file. We want to edit on top of that. So if you go to the bottom right corner, you press this little plus button right here, And what happens up there is that a new layer is created. And this one, this checkered pattern, means that it's transparent. This means that everything you edit will only affect this layer. And that means that everything you retouch is added to that layer and not directly involved with the layer below. And I'm going to show you how. So make sure that when you select your tool, so in this case, we are using our healing brush tool, you go up to the top and you select current and below. You can also, for example, if you want to just touch one layer, change the current layer that is selected, but we want current and below. All layers also a possibility, but right now, this is the way to go. All right, let's zoom in and I'll show you what's going to happen. So let's remove this blemish again. Right now, we are in this layer number 1. We're going to select this area right here, and then we're going to remove that blemish. Now, what's going to happen is I can toggle this first layer on and off. Now it's off, now it's on. But let's do it the other way around. Let's remove the background. Now look what happened there. That new texture is a separate layer. That also means if you want, you can change the opacity of that layer if you don't want an edit to be as strong, right? This is incredible because this means that we can go back and correct things. For example, if you retouch something and you think, this doesn't look that great, you can go into this layer and remove that part again. And this is how we want to work moving forward. And before we really start to get into it, always rename the layers to what you want to do with that layer. Now, this is what we call the blemish removal layer. You can name this whatever you want. It's very personal, but I'm going to call it blemish removal for now. So I'm going to jump in and do a basic removal, and then I'll see you at the next step. So here's a quick pause. I think it's really important to also let you know that I also, when I get a little bit further in the process, I always zoom out a little bit to see from a distance if I still see a little bit of a blemish here and there. Because when you're so up close, it's hard to see really what's going on. And when you've gone through the smaller details, which I feel like I've done enough right now, because the rest will be done in the next step, I always zoom out a little bit to see where I can do some more general corrections. Like I really love how it's looking right now. If we toggle it off and on again, it's already looking a little bit more fresh and clean, like in real life, because you don't see all of those details when you're looking at someone's face, right? So I see this little spot right here, for example. Couldn't see that up close really, so I'm going to remove that one. And to be fair, with this image, just to give you an idea, I've only used this single healing brush tool. I haven't touched the other ones because it's been serving me very nicely. So just so you know, everybody has their own way of working, and this happens to be mine. All right, let's get back into finishing this up. All right, so that was the blemish removal. And honestly, with a skin like Melody's, which is basically flawless, we could stop right here and be done with it. But what we really want to do is go to that next level, and that means frequency separation. Now, it sounds extremely complicated, and honestly, I do think it's a slightly complicated technical way of working with your image, but basically, if you really narrow it down, you're actually separating the texture, what you see right here and right there, from the colors below. So what we are going to do, at least this is my goal, is that we are going to go in and separate all of the texture that's the skin itself, so we don't manipulate the skin, we don't replace it, and then go into her skin color and blend that. So for example, this little gray spot right here, that's just simply lighting and or the camera picking up things that are way too detailed for the eye to see. So what we want to do is we want to remove that gray area below the texture. And how we're going to do that, I'll show you. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to smudge the color and blend it way more smoothly. And the same goes, for example, this little area right here. You see a little bit of a bright stripe. That could be makeup, that could be lighting, that could be the skin in itself. And what we want to do is actually make those transitions smoother. That gives a sense of quality. For example, this slightly harsh line right here, that's makeup plus lighting. We can blend that together without losing a sense of texture. And after that, I'll show you some cool tricks how to, after the fact, still work with the texture and still work with the skin. It's a really awesome way of retouching. And again, we're not breaking the original image. So when it comes to the frequency separation technique, the first steps are very important. The first thing we have to do is create a new layer that is merged between these two. So we want to merge these two layers and add it on top of that. Now, luckily, there's a very easy way to do that. There's a shortcut for that. And on Mac, that is Command-Option-Shift-E. And on Windows, that is Alt-Control-Shift-E. Pretty simple. And what you see is that there's a new layer created on top of those two. So basically, this is these two layers combined into one. So the next step is to duplicate this layer. And there are many ways to do it. But I just simply right-click and duplicate layer and press Enter. There you go. Layer 1 and layer 1 copy. Now the next step is to group these layers. So go ahead and select both of those and click this folder icon. There are also shortcuts for that, but for now, we'll keep it simple and keep it visual for you. And when you open this group, you'll see our layers sitting in there. Now, again, what we're going to do is we're going to rename these layers. And I'm going to name them the way I always name them because I think it's easier for me to separate the one between the others. And we're going to call this one the color blur layer. And this, of course, will be a layer that we are going to blur. And then the top one is going to be the texture layer. And the important thing to note here is that everybody has a different name, low frequency, high frequency, and all that stuff, but we're going to keep it simple today. Now, here's the most important part. We are going to blur this layer in a way that we can start smudging these colors together. So now we're going to turn off in our minds what we're looking at, and we're just going to look at the transition between colors. And what we want is to make sure that most of the detail is gone and that we just see a beautiful transition of colors. And we're going to change that later. Very important to know. All right. Now, first thing we have to do is we have to disable the texture layer. Let's do that right now. Nothing changes. That's correct because these two are identical. Now, select the color blur layer and we're going into Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Many different techniques for many different things, right? And what we want to do, and make sure you look at it, like because every image is different. One is zoomed out a little bit more, one is zoomed in a little bit more. And what I usually maintain is that I want to see that this texture is kind of gone. I don't want to see the difference between those colors anymore. This, again, can vary from image to image what that setting exactly is. Now for this one, I think I'm satisfied somewhere around 27.5 apparently. So we'll round it down and make it 25. Now what's going to happen next is super interesting. And this is what you should keep in mind is that you've blurred it this way and every image is different, right? So let's apply that blur. Now we are going to enable the texture layer and follow me here. This is quite complicated, so make sure you get this one right. Just pay a little bit of attention to the settings that I'm using. We are going to apply this image, that's what it's called, to that color blur layer. So we're going to go up, go to image, go to apply image, and then it looks somewhat like this, which you don't want. And let's go from top to bottom here. The source is, well, of course, our file, and the layer we are applying to, it's called merge right now. That basically means it's applying this image and combining it with everyone involved. And it's actually blending with multiply. We're going to change that. We want this layer to only apply to the color blur layer. So it's going to look like this, the same layer, but blurred. Let's turn off the preview. That's not what we want. The second step, we have color blur. Channel can stay RGB, but we are going to invert this, right? And now it starts to look a little bit funky. And that's actually what's going to happen even more once we change the blending, because that has to be set to add. And what you're seeing now is a preview of the textures that are going to be saved inside of this layer. This is the texture that's going to remain. All right, remember when I said we're going to change the color below these textures? This is the textures I'm talking about. And this layer separates all of this texture from that layer below. Now, press OK. Opacity can stay 100%. Scale can stay too. You can play around with this. I basically never touch that. So press OK. And there we go. And you'll be thinking, what the heck happened to the image? Well, there's one thing we need to change to finalize this preparation step for the color blur, or what we call frequency separation technique. So this texture now is blended as normal. So it's just seen as is, right? And we want to blend that with linear light. And that sounds crazy, but it's back to normal again, right? And I wish I could tell you exactly what's happening, but I think this video would be 15 hours long if I'd go into that. But what's happening now, and you can double check this by toggling off the group and toggling it back on. There's no change. That means that the color blur and the texture equal together the normal image. And now comes the fun part. You select your color blur and you go over to your brush tool, which usually is what it is, a brush tool. But we are going to use a mixer brush tool, and we are going to select the color blur layer. Now, what's really, really interesting here is that this color blur layer is sitting below that texture layer, remember? So this texture layer is bringing back all of that detail. But what we want to do is start blending these colors together and making sure that those transitions that are now still textured are a little bit more smooth. I'm going to show you an example right here, and basically this is more for demonstration purposes, because I'm going to show you what's going to happen when I drag a dark area into a light area. You see what happened there? I'm going to do it a couple more times so you actually get an idea. So what's happening is I'm attacking that blur layer, right, by smudging upwards the color below this texture. So what you'll see is that the texture actually is remaining, but we're only manipulating this blurred layer. Now, that's what we want, right? When we start blending together these harsher areas, we can even start shaping shadow lines across the face, for example, right here. And there's a fun, neat trick I'm going to show you in a little bit. And that's how we can still manipulate certain textures after the fact. But first, we're going to blend all of this stuff together. Now, I'm going to redo all this horrible work I've done. And there we go. And then I'm going to start blending these shapes together. And I'm going to show you a good example. Right here is a shape that we could blend together, right? This is following her cheekbone ever so slightly, but I do feel like this is harsh. So I'm going to start moving this back and forth a little bit. I'm going to drag it along her face. And one of the tricks that I use a lot is to make sure that I follow the shape of the face, right? If I want to extend this darkness a little bit, that's great. We can do that. And I'm going to drag this here. I'm going to show you the difference. It's very subtle, but it's there. You see what's happening? This little area is becoming more smooth. The lines are more smooth downwards. Here's before, here's the after. It's extremely subtle, but here you can see that this dark area right there, we've attacked that and we made sure that it's now a little bit brighter. Now, I'm going to show you one more example before finishing off this image, and I'm going to get back to you to show you those last finishing touches. But I'm going to show you this area right here above the lip, a little bit of a shadow there. And if I pull this down, this right here, if I drag this downwards ever so slightly, keep it subtle, and I toggle this off, see what happened there? I'm going to zoom in for you. Right now, it's slightly darker because of the shade, and now it's brighter. And you do that without touching the top layer. Now, there's something to say for burning and dodging, which is also a technique that brightens areas. But one of the things that I think is kind of a downside is you're actually touching the image. So you're burning and dodging everything that's there. It's all down to preference, what you think is best. I really like this way of working because it allows us to have a lot of freedom. Dodging and burning, if done, I usually do that after touching up this image. So I'm going to show you one more example right here. For example, this right here, this area here is a little bit darker. So I'm going to pull up this to brighten that up a little bit. And the same goes for these transitions into the eyes. You can actually also slightly take away, for example, if someone's looking tired, now this girl's not, but you can also brighten up the color beneath the eyes. And this always, in my opinion, should be done with care. You should always work with the skin, not overdo it, because that's what makes a good image to look at for the eye. That's the most pleasant way of doing it. Here's another example. We're going to pull up to take away a little bit of that darkness. And it's just so subtle. Nobody's going to notice, but everybody's going to notice, if you know what I mean. I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to blend those colors together below the textured layer, and I'm going to check back in with you when I'm done. Now let's pause for a second here. I was doing my brushing and I noticed some textures, like this one, doesn't want to blend away. The reason why is because it's baked into that texture layer. What I really love about this technique is that we can go to that texture layer, select that, and go back to our healing brush tool, right? This one right here, and make sure you set this to current layer only. And we can adjust this layer by selecting, I want this area over here. And this is what's going to happen. It's gone. So this was before, this was after. I'm going to show you another example. This brighter area that we talked about before, I feel like that's still a little bit too obvious, right? So what I can do is I can go into my texture layer, because apparently it's not being affected by my color blur layer. And I can select this area here and go over there and see how it now blends in perfectly. Same goes for this little line over here. I'm thinking, that's a little bit too obvious, right? I'm going to go in and copy paste the texture that's over there. And that's how amazing this tool actually is. I'm going to correct a couple of these spots, but after that, I'm going to continue with the brush. So right here, look there. There you go. Texture still being able to adjust. And I noticed these little highlights by the nose. I think I want those gone as well. So I'm going to only apply that to my texture layer. Now back to my mixer brush tool, to the color blur layer, and I'm going to continue going at this, and I'll see you in a little bit. Well, there we go. And I hope you were able to follow along a little bit, and I hope you're having success with your photo as well. Now let me zoom in just a tiny bit and scroll this picture up. And what we can see if we toggle off our edits and then also toggle off the blemish removal, we get a great sense of what we've been starting with and what we've ended up with. It is a picture that's basically inseparable from the original, But when you really toggle it off, you see that subtle change and how you've improved that image and the skin tone while staying true to what's there. We've worked with her skin, we've kept her complexity, and we haven't drastically changed her face by adding in things that weren't necessary. And this applies to portraits and even skins that are quite a bit more rough to work with, whether that's through the lighting situation or due to some patchiness of the skin itself. We always stay true to who was in front of our camera. And that's the way I like to work. It can be different, but you can always scale this up, right? You can blur the image more, you can blend the texture, and that's what we're gonna do right now. I'm gonna show you the final tweaks of this image. So after doing our skin retouching, let's look into the final tweaks. This is exciting because this is where you can get that last little bit of tweaking and control over how much texture you have or how little texture you have. Now let's start with the bottom layer. We're going to only adjust these two. Let's look at color blur. If we turn down the opacity, you'll see quite quickly that a lot of texture is coming back. Why? It's because you're removing that blur that's combining with that texture layer, and you're actually emphasizing texture now by removing that middle ground, right? And I always like to tweak this a little bit. I always go down ever so slightly to bring back some detail. So let's say we'll go for 80-ish%, right? Now there's a stark difference, and you'll notice only up close between the after and the before. You see that? There's just a little more micro contrast. And the reason that I myself prefer this is because of the fact that my final grading is on a little bit on the softer side. I like to flatten my image a little bit by working on the curve. So that means flattening my highlights ever so slightly and my shadows as well. That means that I lose even more detail. So bringing back that opacity to 80% brings back that sharpness that we avoided at the very start. Now, let's put this back up to 100 real quick and demonstrate what happens when you decrease the texture, because what's going to happen then? Let's go down to about 50%. Now look at that. That's a soft look. And the reason for that is you're now only showing more of that blur layer. So if we would turn this all the way down, there's the blur layer that we actually adjusted, right? So you can also go for a look. It's definitely a look if you want that soft focus feel to your image without losing too much of that original texture. But I like to keep this at 100% because I don't go for that really soft focus look, right? It could be more glamorous as well, if you would call it that. Really wonderful way to play and finally tweak that image into the thing that you want it to be. So for me, I'm happy with this at 80%. There we go. And it's a beautiful middle ground between where we started and where we ended up. So one final time, I'll show you without the blemish retouching what happened in the before and in the after. And here's the final image after touching it up and grading it in Lightroom. And if you want a tutorial on how to do this type of editing, color grading and all that stuff, let me know in the comments because I'll be sure to make a tutorial for that as well.